videos and have really been enjoying things.
Well, good, good. Well, you've got an interesting story. Why don't we begin there?
Sure, yeah. To start there. Okay, I'll start with how far back to go. I was born in St. John, New Brunswick.
Okay.
We live on the East Coast of Canada. Now I live in Shediac with my wife and two kids. We originally, again, I was born in St. John. My parents are both from St. John. We grew up Roman Catholic mainly, although I would say by the time I hit teenage years, we all started to sort of drift away a little bit. My grandfather, still Knights of Columbus, and still very, very much a man of faith. He's 96 now, so he's
Wow.
still very much involved and has been a big influence, even though I didn't quite realize, to what degree Christianity played a role in his life.
Yeah.
It's been something I've sort of rediscovered and sort of gotten a better perspective on. He had built a very nice foundation, a really great family, and sometimes things are so good that you don't even know where all that goodness came from.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. That's
Yeah,
very true.
yeah. So can you hear me okay? Is everything
Yeah,
going
yeah, you sound fine.
perfect? Yeah, so are you familiar with this part of the world at all? Have you ever been to Atlantic Canada or
Nope, not really.
not really? No, okay. So I'm about an hour from PEI. Most people are pretty familiar with Prince Edward Island.
Yeah.
That's a good location to sort of put myself. But St. John's a pretty old city. It's one of the oldest in the country, about 100,000 people with outside area. It was a very blue collar city for the most part. We had dry docks and one of the largest oil refineries. So Irving pretty well is the main employer for the whole province. Actually, it's our GDP is pretty low, but without Irving, it's almost nothing. So very blue collar city. Had a very sort of St. John's kind of unique though. It's a very large city geographically. So it's the second largest city in the country geographically.
Really?
With a very large landmass. So that's 70, 80,000 people are spread out quite a ways. And it takes even though it was a city, I lived in the country of the city. We're still in the city limits, but it was very, very rural. Grew up in a little cottage on a lake. With no real neighbors around, you had to go a fair stretch, didn't have many kids my age and whatnot. So it was, we only celebrated the major holidays as Christians. You went to church for Christmas and the
Yeah.
big ones. And it was, this Christianity thing has sort of come back big for me as to explore anyway, to try to come to terms with. I guess I'm getting off.
No, you're doing fine.
Okay. I don't get to talk to many celebrities, so I'm probably nervous.
Well, if I'm your one crack at it, poor you.
I did speak with Papa Peterson 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, really?
When we first did the Patreon thing, I was one of the first ones to get on board there and
okay.
him. So he's been a big influence for me for sure, and that's sort of how I stumbled onto you. So
yeah. Well, how many siblings?
I have one brother. Yeah, he's
older, younger?
Younger.
Younger.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you think about your growing up years? It sounds lovely. Cottage on a lake.
Very, very good. I was surrounded by a lot of good men and women and loving people. Very good, strong family. Not without its imperfections, of course. Alcoholism and things are there everywhere.
Yeah.
But it was very, very lovely, very well protected. My father is a really, really great guy, very interesting guy. As far as education and what goes for them, they grew up. My grandfather is French Acadian. And St. John is a loyalist city, very much Irish, Catholics a lot, but the French parts of the province are sort of a little further away. I live in a Francophone area now, so
Okay.
St. John is primarily English. My
Okay.
grandfather was actually the first Francophone police officer
Oh,
in the
wow.
city. So, and they grew up in the north end of the city, which was pretty rough. And you learn to drop your accent and quack like the rest of the ducks. So yeah, even though I have a French name, I don't speak French very well at all. And you know, my kids go to my oldest goes to an English school, and but we've done very well in the area. We enjoy it. It's a nice spot. It's the only beach community really in the province. So
Wow.
we moved here about 11 years ago, and you know, we've been really enjoying it.
Good.
It's a great spot. Kind of going back to the history, my dad had a lot of different jobs, but he was mainly a projectionist.
Oh,
Yeah. So even though we lived, there wasn't a lot of kids to play with, so I would always trail along with him to the theater, and I'd watch. You know, he worked in a bunch of different movie houses. Some of them were, you know, two screens. Some of them, and then he eventually moved on to larger companies, and eventually he went out on his own and built his own theater, and
wow.
that was the family business for quite some time.
Huh.
So I I'll help you. I'll get you to help keep me on track. It's I guess I hadn't thought this far back. So I went to elementary school, quaint little school. Went to a fairly larger high school, about 3,000 people in that high school, so it was fairly large. Um, had some health issues when I was younger. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis fairly young, 7 or 8 years old. So I had a hard time. The family had a hard time trying to manage that. Going to school became kind of hard.
Yeah.
I missed 50, 60, 70 days a year.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and one of the, you know, looking back on it now, I certainly think, you know, we know more now, could have managed things a little better, but
Yeah.
that was a struggling point for, I look back now and think how hard it must have been on my parents to
Yeah.
have a sick child, I guess, but
Yeah.
it was definitely a big part of my life, and it interfered with a lot of things. School for me was because I was ill. I didn't get to participate in it in the way that I
Yeah.
would have probably that everybody else did.
Yeah.
But also, I didn't really care for it all that much. I didn't really care for school up until um, starting to get into studies later in life that I start to, you know, kind of appreciate it. But more than that, I think I was intimidated by it because I hadn't participated in it so fully, and I
Yeah.
didn't feel that I had the intellectual abilities to you know, to do
Yeah.
much with it. I didn't focus much on it. To me, it was sort of a practical thing. You had to go do this to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, so my where would I go from here?
Well, so after high school, college or start a job?
So when I was done high school, I was I went to university for I wanted to be a cop. That was the
Yeah.
idea, to be
Okay.
policing. But I had, you know, had it in my mind that I wanted to probably go into detective work or something like that. So I was like, "Ah, you know, I really need a degree. I thought, you know, I need to get an education. So
Yeah.
uh, I said, I'll do psychology or I'll do something like that. I had no idea about universities, just nothing. I had no idea. I applied, I got in, I went, and yeah, I just was having a hard time making it connect as to how this was serving the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
So I didn't really enjoy it. It was a local, our provincial university, University of New Brunswick. Um, I was probably, I had ended up, I was a year older, I believe, going into university. So I was 18 when I went. It was, it was a difficult thing because I didn't want to just drop out, and my parents didn't really push me one way or the other. Neither one of them had gone to the college or university, so there wasn't a big push.
Yeah.
The theater was still running at the time as a family business, and I was kind of managing it part-time, going to the university. But I did go to, I guess it would be like a junior college type thing after that. And they had a nice program where you did 2 years there and then 2 years at St. Thomas University, and you could do your 4-year BA there. So I did that, went off to the college, and while I was at the college, I started to realize that, wait a second, I might be able to handle this. I started to get a little bit more confidence in the intellectual pursuits, and did very, very well in university. But about halfway through, I got a part-time job at the local jail. They hired casuals. This was a program that they had to try to fill in the blanks. In the summer times, they'd go hire a corps of young guys and girls and shove them through to fill in the vacation spots. And my dad had known the local deputy there, so
Okay.
he had they had met at the Tim Hortons one day, and he said, "Yeah, hey, look, tell him to drop by." So
Yeah.
I thought to myself, well, this would be great. This would be great for the resume. I'll go do
Yeah.
all the training and whatnot. And I I got a call from the superintendent, and he said, "Yeah, listen, you missed the training class." I said, "I missed the training class? What do you mean?" He said, "Well, why don't you come in and challenge the test?" And I had no idea how I was going to challenge a test on a job that I had
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
never done before. But I went in and I did the test, and it was fairly easy, a few videos, and you did your thing. And I did 6 months there. So I was going to St. Thomas doing a criminology degree, which and with a major focus on psychology, the majority of it. Crim theory was interesting, but I didn't make it my main course of study. I really went into developmental and started with trying to get a good foundation in psychology, because to me that was going to be the most applicable to the policing. But as I started to work in the institution and started to get kind of involved with law enforcement, and I had done a few work terms with police forces and whatnot doing program development, I started to realize, I don't think I want to do this. The policing thing it didn't fit that well for me. So I was graduating and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I said, well, I'm going to just apply full time at the institution and see what happens. So I did, and I managed to get full time and started working there. So I guess I'll let you, whatever way you'd like to go from there.
Well, so I just did an interview yesterday with a small podcast, and they asked me, what I would do if I wasn't pastoring. And at this point in my life, I said, well, I'd, probably retire and keep doing the YouTube thing because I enjoy that. But I'm a little ways from retirement, so I'm not that close. But earlier in life, I probably would have been in law enforcement, which would probably strike people as interesting. Although my father was a pastor and my uncle was a cop. And one of the, you wind up, before you get a career off, and you wind up in different jobs. And one of my more enjoyable jobs that I had was a campus cop at Calvin College and Seminary since I went to seminary there. I had that job for years and really enjoyed it. And, it's being a campus cop. You don't have a gun. You're not going to shoot anybody. I mean, you're not much, you have less authority than Barney Fife, but it's, part of what I enjoyed about that is part of what I enjoyed. Just this morning, there was I don't know why, there's probably, 40 feet of building here, but the homeless people just love to sleep against my door. And I came in through a different door this morning, so I didn't even know it was there. First I heard coughing. It's like, oh, okay. So, and then I roused him a little while ago, and, talked to himself quite a bit about how terrible this world is, and how he was the Archangel Gabriel, and off it went from there, all of which, of course, I can hear through my door. and I've just always enjoyed, maybe it's kind of the opposite of the it's opposite of the edited, tailored, idolatrous image that screens project at us constantly of what normality is and what the good life is. Because if you're doing something like law enforcement or working in a jail, you're sort of seeing the underside, but there's a truthiness to that world that is refreshing and stimulating and enlightening. And so I've, so my uncle, after he spent a career in law enforcement, like almost all other New York cops, moved down to Florida for his retirement and took up doing, motorcycle ministry with motorcycle gangs. And so, I sense, and I always enjoyed my uncle. Um, he always had great stories, but there wasn't, my father, who was a preacher in a rough area town, and my uncle, who was a cop. The commonality between those two worlds is the kind of reality and life that is seldom well portrayed in it's interesting, where you've got, on one hand, your father is a projectionist, so you grow up sort of in the, in the particular light of the movie projector, of the screen. And
Yeah.
yet, which often, it's interesting because, the cinematic industry often tries to portray this other underside of the world, and seems fascinated by it. But I think partly by virtue of the kind of interchange you need in order to make a film work. I mean, real people are more monotonous sometimes. I
Yeah.
mean, when he first started his, the guy on the other side of the door, this is the first time I met him this morning. On one hand, it was okay, because you definitely begin to see patterns,
Yeah.
and you definitely begin to, okay, so now he's starting out on how wretched the world is and how he doesn't want to live. And, I hear a lot of that. And then the Archangel Gabriel thing came up, and, well, there's a new twist on it. So, kind of wonder what his diagnosis would be. There's a lot of unmedicated schizophrenics that wind up in the homeless community. And so they'll tend to just kind of cycle around. Some of them, of course, will find their way um, into prison or jails. They'll get into jails fairly regularly, I imagine. The really interesting schizophrenics in my life are the ones who actually manage to stay out of jails. And when
Yeah.
you think about the kind of, that's quite a feat when you're an unmedicated schizophrenic, and you can, for the most part, reliably steer clear of the law sufficiently to stay out of jail, and therefore keep your, keep what you consider your quality of life arise, because the thing you don't want to do is be forced onto medication in the jail or the prison, which is exactly what will happen. And
Yeah.
of course, then you'll get guys like David Berkowitz, the 44 caliber killer, who was, terrorizing New York when I was growing up. So to me, when you wrote me, and I've just got to, I just know that people who work in this industry get a lot of interesting stories, but not just the stories, but I think develop a certain degree of ballast with reality
Mm.
about human nature and the human condition, that I think this projected image that we live in the middle of, increasingly so, simply can't engage with. So,
I was as naive, sorry, as every young man was going into it. And certainly, I think if I was to try to describe sort of the experience that I've had in life has sort of been a little bit of a letdown when I start brushing up. You put a lot of professionals and different people on pedestals
Yep.
when you're younger.
Yep.
You have this idea, you know,
Yep.
and the more you go out and rub up against society and its systems and the people in it, you start to realize that, you know, that's not the case. That's not reality, and that our systems are. I mean, I was floored when I walked into that institution for the first time. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I really couldn't. I thought to myself, this can't be real. And I do have to be a little bit careful
Yeah.
because I still I work for the province.
Yeah.
So I'm limited as sort of what I would like to honestly say. But
Sure.
I'm so I'm trying to walk the line carefully between telling my story correctly, but not saying anything that might get me in hot water. Um, the letdown of working in these institutions, but also, you know, this our system's probably slightly different. Of course, our jails are remand centers, so we house everybody. So if you get a murder beef or whatever, you're coming to us first, and you'll stay with us during your whole court process. So I have had I've had a very thorough career working with mostly max offenders, working max units. That's how they reward you for doing a good job. If you're good at what you do, go down to the max unit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was interesting was I came in at a time when there was sort of a changing of the guard, where the old school guys were sort of on their way out, and this new, call it an educated group, were coming in,
Yeah.
more social welfare ideas
Yep.
and whatnot. And there was a buffering going on there. There was some. I got to see the value. I mean, most of the time, the you know, if you had been working in the correctional systems over the last 30, 40 years, and were part of that old school, they there was a culture, and these cultures are breaking down even inside. I mean, you could talk to offenders and they would tell you, like, you know, the generations that are coming in now aren't mapping onto even the cultures in the institutions. You know,
Yeah.
there used to be a hierarchy, there used to be an order,
Yep.
and you were as much locked in there doing time as anybody, and everybody had agreements on how things were done. And there was
Yep.
sort of, you know, there were um, all of these different unspoken rules, and all of a fairly stable way of doing business. You know, and everybody understood what was going on. But as we started to get more and more and more of younger individuals in, that's when things started to get really crazy.
Mm.
We were going through an overcrowding period. We didn't have enough institutions. I mean, you know, so everything was getting very charged.
Mm.
So we ended up having a few riots, and you know, these actually, a few of them are on YouTube. You can find. Yeah, through the I guess through the disclosures, they were able to get the videos, and the inmates who were charged put them on YouTube. But
God.
yeah, so we're going through all these different things, and then working the max units. And again, I can't get into too many
Sure.
details, but I started to I was really good at what I did. Really good at it. Diffusing things was what I was good at. I was good at getting in there no matter how wound up somebody was.
Yep.
I was always very balanced, able to get in there and get it sort of calmed down.
Yep.
Um, but you know, I started to change. I noticed that, you know, the thing I started to get, they call it getting hard. That's
Yeah.
or calloused, getting, you know, it's this sort of galvanizing that happens, you know,
Yeah.
to everybody. And I think in your profession too, you
Yeah.
probably see this quite regularly. I got to assume our professions overlap
Yeah.
in quite a few different ways.
Yeah.
Um, I wouldn't change anything per se. I would still, you know, everybody has to, a young man, I think, you know, that call to war type of thing, where you go and you grow up, you know, you
Yeah.
go there and you have to face reality and look at it. And but there's all kinds of bizarre circumstances you find yourself in, when you're working in places like that. And it, as time went on, 4 or 5 years, I met my wife in there as well. She came in as a casual, and then went on to work. She works for the federal government now in our prison system. Um, it wasn't. I met great people, and I worked with great people. I did about 12 years. Was bouncing, and I did 3 different institutions. Um, one of the, there is a bit of a like. I have been writing all this down. Been going through it. I've been trying to sort of piece it together. And again, the what I've been writing is more detailed and kind of goes into things. And when I'm in a place that I can kind of release that to the world, I hope to get into a broader discussion about what these institutions are going through a change, and it's very easy it's very, very easy to pick a side.
Yeah.
Most of the time people do pick a side in these types of things. You're either pro reform, or you want to just water and bread, like
Yeah.
there's these 2 perspectives, and
Yeah.
and it's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And what I've been trying to do over the last 5 years is sort through all that, and go, okay, we talk about prison reform, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
What tools do we have to do such a thing? And the truth is, we really don't have that many great tools. I mean, we still really don't know what to do with violently mentally ill people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a hard problem. That's
Yeah.
not how do we what do you do? And we've had a lot of issues with segregation in this country. Our segregation policies have come under attack, and courts have ordered us to make changes, which is fine, except for what do we do? It's fine.
Well, when you say segregation, you mean segregation in terms of people and their level of violence, in terms of why they're in there, that type of segregation?
No, I mean actual solitary confinement.
Oh, solitary confinement. Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, solitary confinement's been one of the biggest issues that we've been dealing with. It's been a tool that's been used in institutions since,
Yeah.
And the Canadian government has basically said you're not to use it anymore.
Yeah.
Which I'm 100% on board with. I mean,
Yeah.
I've watched far too many people lose their minds
Yeah.
in these, it's strange to have such an archaic system. You think, you look around and you see an evolved society. And yes, we've built new institutions, but a lot hasn't really changed in the way that we sort of look at things. But what I've been working on is sort of my own story, plus trying to thread that needle of what prison reform should look like, what could we hope for given the realities of things. Sam Harris has a nice saying, working with human nature, and I think that's it, is to be very, very honest with where we're at. Don't overstate what our abilities are. You see this with the mental health system. We need more mental health. But look at, what are our tools?
Yeah.
What are our tools? Look how weak they are. I mean, when you look at the outcomes for most of the treatment modalities, they're not great. They really, really aren't. And so I've been really trying to, work on that. But I should step back a little bit and go back a little ways and sort of explain to you the other side of things, which was about 6-7 years in, I started to have, some health issues. I mean, I noticed my family was telling me, you're a little hostile, your aggression's up a little bit. And I was noticing that. I was noticing I'm getting, I'm going to work looking for a fight. And, they're easy to find at a certain So, I started to notice some things changing about me. Started to notice I was getting dizzy, having sort of disassociation, and one day I was out. I remember we were at the park. I was pushing my daughter in the swing, and I don't feel anything. No positive emotion at all, just nothing, and I realized I've been feeling like that for for a long time. And, you know, you don't see it happening necessarily. It's sort of a, you know, slow
Yeah.
progression. In a lot of ways, it's protecting you.
Yeah.
And, you know, we call, so, you know, I started having pains in my throat and, you know, different things. And the doctors started suggesting, you know, well, maybe it's anxiety mix this. So what do you start the pill parade, right?
Yeah.
So started with the medications and whatnot, and just we had moved to Shediac. They built two brand new institutions. They were, you know, $70 million institutions, huge. They modeled them after a few institutions from Maine, open concept facilities. You're probably familiar with maybe what these look like, but we used to have what they would call podular linear, where you're in a bubble and you're actually separated from the units, so you're not in there with the offenders. These were completely open. You're in there 3 stories high, and they're just stacked, and it's 2 officers per 60 offenders.
Wow. That'd make you anxious.
Yeah, and I mean, and I was a guy who had lots of years in and lots of hard places, and
Yeah.
and I went in, and even me, I'm like, wow, this is different. This is, and I started to realize that the way I was interfacing with this layout was completely different than before.
Yeah.
You're you're so in touch with everything.
Yeah.
You know, you're feeling all of the little nuances and everything, and you're every little situation you're aware of, and it
Yeah.
just feels like you're in a pressure cooker all the time.
Yeah.
Well, this was not working well for the offenders either, so we started to have tons and tons and tons of different issues. And just a moment, Paul, sorry.
Yep.
Started to have lots and lots and lots of issues, and things were just kind of spiraling out for the management, for the institutions in general. And my depression and things were just getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
To the point where, and Peterson makes this very clear, and you know, others since I've managed to read, the moment you don't want to be there anymore, the moment that your body says, I don't want to do this, and you're forcing yourself,
Yeah.
then you really, you know,
Yeah.
spiral out. And it was you know, it's hard because in this province, you know, we were making great money. My wife and I, these jobs afford you a very good life.
Yeah.
And things were, you start looking around, what else would I do? What
Yeah.
else could I do? And you start to go, you know, geez, the opportunities really weren't as plentiful as I wanted. You have houses, you have kids, you have these responsibilities that you have to sort of, you know, you got to keep paying the bills. You've got to, and so the idea of stepping back and, you know, and making the sacrifices when your family's ultimately going to be the one to suffer it, maybe, didn't, you know, I was stuck between that. It
Yeah.
felt like I was shackled to this thing, and I just couldn't leave it. And not only that, I didn't realize that the degree that I was violating my own morality doing this job. I mean, there, it was a very, you know, it's funny, you think like, you know, okay, the government gives you the rights and to go and do what you do, but I really didn't realize that I was losing myself to this thing. And
Yeah.
I was angry and just resentful, and didn't know what to do really.
Yeah.
And in some ways had plateaued, you know, feeling like, is this it? You know, like, I'm gonna do this and pay the bills and keep moving forward, and that's, you know, that's gonna be life. You know, your soul screaming at you, you know, you have to move, you have to do something. And you know, I let my body go. You know, I think it was about 50, 60 pounds overweight, and, you know, and,
Yep.
you know, relationships and whatnot were suffering. And I know I'm not alone. You know,
Yeah.
I was well aware of the people I was working with, and
Yep.
you know, my brother's a cop, and I'm well aware nurses, pick the front line,
Yeah.
just look
Yeah.
at it and you start to realize that you're like, oh my God, I'm not alone in this. I mean, I'm seeing all these people and you're seeing the same symptoms in them. And, the divorce rates are through the roof and the substance abuse rates. And I mean, everybody's, popping pharmaceuticals just to get through the day. And you're going,
Yep.
this is broken. This
Yep.
thing, I don't know how, at one point, everybody was pretty clear about who the good guy was and what the role was. And that those lines have started to
Yeah.
shift in a big way. So about 5 years ago, I went out, went and seen the doctor, and they put me out. Went and seen a psychologist, started to have conversations. The PTSD diagnosis comes up, which that's been my main area of sort of inquiry over the last 5 years, is sort of trying to understand mental health as it pertains to the frontline society, what and sort of how to negotiate this thing forward, and what am I going to do? What am I going to do with my life now? Because
Yeah.
one thing that came almost immediately after the diagnosis was that we have I'm sure there's private insurance companies in the States that handle these things, but we have like a crown corporation called WorkSafe. And what they do is if you're injured on the job or whatnot, they kind of come in and deal with you.
Yep.
So I started dealing with them, and the doctors gave me a permanent work restriction, meaning you don't get to go back. So you're okay. And this is more common than what you'd realize. I mean, I have friends in the military. I have friends who are cops who are all in the same type of situation, that these agencies don't really want you back once you get these diagnoses. They don't want you. So on top of it all, you sort of get stuck with the problem of, what am I going to do now?
Yeah.
And many people, their identities are very intertwined with what they do, especially if you've gone to police academy and you've made these major investments.
Absolutely.
So the identity crisis comes in on top of it all, and all that. So I was the aggression was a big issue, just being angry and irritable, and just just hatred towards and to think that I felt like I let myself down. Really, that was what it felt like. It felt like I had betrayed my better human nature for a paycheck. I was at the end of the day, I didn't feel like I was helping anybody. I thought I was hurting people.
Yeah.
For the most part. And I mean, yes, it's a necessary structure. Prisons are needed for certain. But, those people, a good portion of them didn't look much different than me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you start seeing guys from high school, or you start seeing, your
Yeah.
friends' fathers, and then you start seeing people come in, and you're like, you're
not living in a huge population center. I mean, it might be a decent sized city,
we had
but
about, we had about 200 offenders,
Yeah.
and I was responsible about 40 of them at a time.
Yeah.
But it was the whole province. All of the maximum offenders got shipped to this one institution, which wasn't smart either. So we tended to put all the issues in one place and then wonder why we had such issues.
Such issues.
Yeah. So about I went out of work about 5 years ago now. I've had this massive chunk of time, and sort of been taking it as a time to learn, to try to come up with a plan to move forward, and where I was going to go and what I was going to do. And I started out with YouTube, right? I mean, you get on this thing and you go, what is this? and just getting your mind wrapped around, what is this thing? I mean, just talking to you, kind of like I didn't get a cell phone up until 6 months ago. Technology has always sort of I don't know. I guess I never moved beyond the cinema to a certain degree. I've always looked at it like, okay, this is a tool. What do I
Yep.
do with it, right? I mean, other than word programs and, doing research and whatnot, that's how I sort of viewed uh, the internet. And growing up in a small place, we were a few years behind in some ways.
Yep.
I think I was in high school before my parents got a CD player, so it was we were a little ways behind, and I sort of missed the curve. I was born
Yep.
in '84, but I did miss the curve for the to be totally immersed in technology.
Yep.
Um, but this YouTube thing, I mean, I'm watching lectures from Stanford, Harvard, and I'm going, this is incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, how is this possible that I can sit here and take all this in and nobody's charging me? I'm going,
Yeah.
it was amazing. And then, so I got hooked in with philosophy. Definitely was the first place to go, sort of thing, and started with Stefan Molyneux and all of the guys associated with him. And then one day I'm watching Rogan and on comes Jordan Peterson. And I had no idea what I was looking at. I mean, I was just floored. And I said, I got to talk to this guy. I mean, and one of the things that I've come to, a skill that I've sort of come to rely on with YouTube is that if you give me enough time and you're to watch somebody, I can generally figure out if they're full of shit or not.
Well, that's part of
Yeah,
that's part of what you learn doing the jobs you did. That's a
right,
survival skill.
right. And I have a feeling you have a similar skill. But more than that, you get to sort of see what's behind them, what's pushing
Yeah.
them, what's
Yeah.
what's motivating them. And I listened to the Career Atheists, and I listened to all them, and from what I could gather, their whole thing was just to beat up on poor Christians, or to go out there and sort of, they seem to be enjoying what they're doing, but I don't know that they're trying to actually contribute to anything constructive.
Yeah.
That was the feeling I was getting. But Peterson's a different thing, and you're
Yeah.
a different thing. I'm listening to you guys, and I'm going, these are good men. I know they're good people. You start to pick it up with the little tiny things, not necessarily what you guys say, but sort of, I just watch what you do. And, I've watched and listened to everything Peterson's put out, and I mean more than once. I like to think I got a black belt in Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was, I go, okay, you got to pick a master. And he was the first master I can honestly say that I want to say I submitted to, but that's what it feels like. You feel like you're, part of the working in prisons and things, your trust level goes down for people big time. So negotiating or navigating the internet and trying to, find individuals who you believe, it's challenging, but there's so much content with you folks that it's easy to kind of go, okay, I see what's underneath these guys. I see what's driving them, and it's good. It's
Yeah.
not. It feels good. The last couple of years, I would say, things have definitely gotten better. One of the options that became available to me was to do a master's degree. So I chose to do it in counseling psychology. So I've been chipping away at that, but also taking the time to spend time with my kids and try to reconnect, try to awaken the old fella, the guy the guy I feel like I used to be a little bit, that being able to connect with people.
Yeah.
I still have been fairly this was a reflection time. I was forced to sit,
Yeah.
really, really forced to. It's not natural for me to want to sit and do that. But being forced to sit and having this incredible technology at my fingertips, I mean, I think you and other people probably were putting the 14-hour days in on YouTube for, with Peterson in the beginning too. I mean, I was just,
Yep. Yep.
And of course, everybody around you sort of going, you know, what's the matter with you? And even
Yeah,
I'm judging
yeah,
myself. I'm going like, maybe you have lost it, Doucette.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Maybe you have. Your conversation with Job, I was like, okay, that's pretty well sums it up. I'm in the same place. You're watching yourself. You're going, you know,
Yeah,
doing, what am I doing?
yeah,
And of course, Peterson spun out to, so I eventually kind of figured out, you know, the algorithm's there, but you don't really necessarily have to let it use you. You can
right,
use it
right.
if you sort of. So I said, okay, how would I took my, you know, typical university syllabus, and I think, okay, how do I structure this learning? And you know, I think of it like kind of collecting Pokemon cards to a degree. I find an individual, and you know, I do a deep dive, and you know, I kind of close the chapter, and then I move on, and I
Yep,
feel like you start to create this framework of people who you
yep.
go, hey, you know, and trying to be brave enough to listen to things that you may have otherwise written off before. That was the hard part, I
Yeah.
think, for me, to just be to force myself to listen to something that I maybe before would have, you know, you would have just said, nah, that's crazy, that's foolishness. And really, really, really try to be as open, no matter how much I it may challenge what I think. That's a hard thing. That's been hard. I got a pretty good ego, and constantly chipping away at it to constantly be in that state where you're okay with not knowing, you know. And that's been one of the hardest things for me, because everybody wants to cling to a foundation, and you know, I I feel like I've started that I have one now, or at least the beginnings of it. I don't feel lost per se. I kind of know where to plug data points in now. You've got this framework. Okay, put that over here. I know how to think about these things. And of course, after you take in so many people, you know, whether it's Jonathan Haidt, or you know, or yourself, or Robert Sapolsky, or Steven Pinker, or any of the others. I mean, you start doing all this deep diving, and you start going, okay, listen, there's a whole bunch of really brilliant people out there from all different disciplines. But I feel like we're starting to get to a point where everything's converging. I mean, the experts are all leaving their safe little categories of inquiry, and they're going out, and YouTube. I mean, I sort of feel like it's becoming. I said to my buddy, I said, you know, is this the UFC of ideas? I mean, it's like, you know, or these guys are champions of thought. And I really do see that, people are able to leave the universities now, and have this strong presence that isn't that not, I mean, deplatforming is real. I understand that there's real risks with what you folks do. I really do get that. But the more that brilliant people like Peterson and others can come out and have a place to speak honestly with good intention. um, you know, one of the things I wanted to ask you um, was, what have you come up against that's challenged your faith on the internet? I mean, you've probably been exposed to so many ideas, and at times they do seem to pull at at what you're standing on, or at least appears that way. What have been some of the ones that have really challenged you, like the new modern, like modern, I call it just modern information, like you come up against stuff that you go, wow, that doesn't exactly map on, or if that's true, that doesn't exactly map on things, or is your level of understanding enough, to sort of combat those things?
I I can't remember yesterday, this morning, I just posted a video on the Peterson Manson conversation. Um, Trying to think of the term Peterson was using, zone of, because psychology is not my area of
Oh,
expertise.
zone of proximal development. Yeah.
Zone of proximal development. Um, I, And I like what Peterson said to Manson, in that probably part of the reason that people have found him helpful was that zone of proximal development, because I am, and you've said a lot of this already, and you said it quite well, in terms of trying to be brave enough to listen to something that you don't want to listen to, and trying to maintain that. And actually, status of various kinds jeopardizes that openness, because everybody wants to see the pastor deconvert. Everybody wants to see the atheist convert. And so once you achieve a degree of status in a hierarchy that's connected to something, you 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 are in a place where you are in real danger of bullshitting yourself.
Yeah.
And part of, I would imagine, your profession, you have to know, in a population like that, that there are people who can take you out. And certainly if they coordinate with each other, you don't stand much of a chance. And I came into this, I talk on my channel often about my relationship with C.S. Lewis's book Miracles.
Mm.
I came into this partly because I the kind let's say the how can I phrase this? We kind of, so we sort of have things on two sides of us. One of them is sort of the idols of Babylon, and the projected lie that is continued to be reinforced subtly under the surface. That, again, I liked how Mark Manson talked about it with his self-help, that, well, we all know the good,
Mm.
and the good is, the better looking is better than less good looking, wealthier is better than poorer, healthier is better than more sickly. And you could just kind of go through life looking at all of these things, and we're to a point in our world, especially with this projected idolatry, that um my wife and my daughters were watching, well, I've been watching a whole different, when I had my sons living at home, we watched different TV than when I have now my daughters at home. And so we're watching things like The Bachelor and The Bachelorette and Selling Sunset. And there's this image of, these people are spending enormous amounts of money on clothing and makeup and lifestyle and plastic surgery, and it's the top of the hierarchies in all of these different areas. And the point of the show is the relational drama between them. And so you watch this stuff, and it sort of has, on one hand, it is subtly grooming us to worship what's at the top of these hierarchies, which comes very natural to us.
Mm.
But at the same time, it is also exposing the seedy underside and the deceit of wealth. That's one of
Yeah.
the really interesting lines in the parable of the soils, whereas the one particular soil has rich soil on top of rocks. And in the Gospel of Mark, it talks about the deceitfulness of wealth. And, well, what is deceitful about wealth? It always promises something that it can't finally deliver. And so we've got that, which is just present, continually bombarding us with that. And then there's the other side, which is the other lie, that through science and technology we can cure all ills. And nested in there is the mockery that is present in celebrity atheism, the mockery and the contempt for the foolish fideist who continues to cling to maybe not guns, especially if he's a Mennonite, but continues to cling to hope in God, that God will somehow deliver. And these things, I really like the way you talked, you shared your story in terms of these things colonize us under the radar, sometimes imperceptibly slowly, until we do something, and we have to, or those who love us around us stop us and say, hey, what happened to you? And there are, again, because I've got, Peterson's, I did that video yesterday, so I've got Peterson's talk with Manson on my mind.
Mm.
Peterson quite rightly notes, he says, Jung's idea that Jesus Christ represents the ideal, the ideal man. And of course, it was so funny when Michaela shoots over her head and says, well, he didn't have it so good. I mean, he's not on selling Sunset or The Bachelor. And but what I find is that part of what is healthy for me in terms of not losing touch with the person in jail, the person who is homeless on the street, the mentally ill person, whereas this, in all likelihood, untreated schizophrenic that went from cursing the world and hating his existence to identifying himself as the angel Gabriel, in the course of 3 or 4 minutes of monologuing outside my door.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
I do see this continuous, and this is another thing that sort of is a flag to me when I'm watching people, is that there's still a dialogue going on.
Yes.
All the time.
Yes.
All the time, and it's not going to go away.
No, it isn't.
It's there, and you have to contend with it all the time.
Yes.
The more that I read, the more that I listen, the more I have to be okay with this not knowing, to a certain degree, this faith idea. Intellectually, I believe her name was Poe.
Yeah.
She talked about this idea of intellectually getting the ideas, and Peterson, that's what he helped me do, is connect with intellectually with theology, which is something I've just stayed away from. I just wrote it off. And this idea that there's a deeper thing there. You need to go back and look. And I've been a person who's been, I like to think of myself as I'm a rationalist, and I still hold on to that very tightly. I almost am afraid to let it go. You don't want to be the fool. I say I don't want to be the asshole who doesn't get the joke. That's to be that person who just was naive.
Yeah.
And because I've been that so many times.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, all of the people who I seem to admire, all of the men I look up to, I go, what are they standing on? What's my, my grandfather was, I'm not so sure that he ever understood more than the 10 Commandments. I mean, he went to church every Sunday, and and this is one of the things that I agree deeply with you, and I hope that Vervaeke's group gets this scalability issue that you've been talking about, because if it doesn't make sense to my 96-year-old grandfather, if it doesn't ring true to him, if it doesn't have that scalability, and I think that perspective, when you've spent all your time in academia, or you've spent time with an upper side of society, sometimes it's very hard to relate or even understand everybody else, and finding the medicines that are going to work properly for them. And this is where I feel like the moment that we get into these word salads and we start creating a whole new vocabularies to describe things that have already been described, and we're done very, very well, you know. And then you see people producing books and they stand there like, look what I did. And I go, I'm scared to even go out and talk, you know, in forums like this, because I don't feel like I have an original thing to say.
Yeah.
Really, I feel like I'm just regurgitating or repeating many greater people than me.
Yeah.
And I always feel that way.
Yeah.
And so the ideas, I almost feel like I don't have a right to them to a certain degree. You know, I haven't earned them, and and it's not from lack of being exposed to them, because I really have obsessively gone about trying to understand it. But I have broken up. Obviously, I've had to balance my obligations for my graduate studies with my personal endeavors, and you know, we use sort of a biopsychosocial framework. And what amazed me was that when I started, you know, the program I'm in, and a lot of the programs these days, they're so focused on behavioralism and you know, these scientifically based interventions. The moment you start talking about existential or spiritual ideas, I don't know if they've lost the language, or that the language has lost its, you know, like you can't talk about Jung. You talk about Jung, you're laughed out of a classroom. I mean, like that there's no value there.
Yeah.
And then you start to carry that idea forward that how many have we written off a lot of value? And I mean, it's clear to me we have. I agree with the meaning crisis. I agree with that that's where we're at. I agree that it may be getting accelerated, because I mean, to have a meaning crisis, you got to be at the top of Maslow's hierarchy most of the time. You've got to have ascended to the top before you have the privilege to deal with this problem, right? I mean,
that's true.
And you know, and that's what I try to realize is that, you know, okay, first of all, it's a privilege to sort of have the time to sit and think about this.
Yes, it is.
These issues. And I've been, not that they don't come without suffering. And I think that that's why I appreciate Peterson and yourself so much, is because I can see that you've suffered with these ideas. I can see it. I can see that when he talks, he's not talking to you or me.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the inner dialogues.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see it the way he sets things up, and the way he carries on his narratives, that, you know, these are, that's a man who has struggled with all of this.
Yeah.
And if Maps of Meaning is any indicator that, you know, now being a guy who has dealt with a stress disorder, I see a lot of the same sorts of things in him that I see in myself. And you feel like this meerkat who constantly is looking around,
yeah,
you know, for the next thing, because you're so aware of that that the reality that we're living in is a gift. This has never been seen before, and we're dealing with some cards that we haven't, but at the same time, the substructures that are underneath are the same, haven't changed.
Yeah.
I don't think our solutions are necessarily going to come from technology or anything else in a major way. But I've been a martial artist most of my life. That's been something that had gotten me through my youth. I had a strange relationship with that as well, because it was contributing to my health issues. I started competing very, very young. Was blessed to get good coaches and was very, very successful at it. I was on the Canadian team for a few years and fought at the Pan Am Games, World Championships, did all that stuff. But the competition anxiety and whatnot, sorry,
that's okay,
was causing my body to just break down. My body couldn't keep up with it.
Yeah.
So when I was in my early 20s, I had to say goodbye to it. I said, okay, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And focused on my studies. But about 4 years ago, when things shook up, and I'm sitting here, I'm 50 pounds overweight, and my body's just a mess. My mind's a mess. I went back to it, and started to one of the things that I experienced so much as a martial artist was these false prophets. You meet so many people who are in, they're wearing a belt, or they're, and you're supposed to just accept everything that's said. Don't challenge it. Don't. And what I experienced is that the belts didn't matter. it didn't, in the real world, which was the competition arena, it didn't matter. I could see that most of the guys who were teaching, they couldn't, they weren't athletes. Most of them couldn't go in and hold their own in any combat, situation. And I sort of carried that same thing forward, that when I got into academia, I'm like, okay, this is great. Theory's great. It's wonderful. Having working in the institutions, I'm going, this is not mapping onto reality.
Yeah.
It's just not.
Yeah.
And, this idea that, I realize that we're in a meaning crisis, but I don't know that inventing new religions with more complicated language is the way to go. And it seems to me that there's an awful lot of people out there, who are standing on the backs of a lot of other great people, just using the same language, same ideas to try to influence people, when really, even Peterson, after you're done with him, the most responsible thing to do is go back and sort of look at everything that he's built up on. So I,
Yep.
went through this book list and said, okay, how did he come to this? And then you start, I do have, there's a level of analysis that I think is right when you're trying to, especially when you're jumping through so many categories of inquiry, like you can't go too deep. So what I do is, if I can trust the expert that I'm sort of relying on, like for yourself, I'll never be able to dive as deep as you have. But I'll let you be my guide.
Yep.
This is like the magic school bus for me. I just, I go on and I find the right people, and people that I feel like I can trust and that are genuinely driven by something good or something beyond themselves. And that's sort of what I use. And I navigate as much as Sam Harris does constantly dialogue with himself to a certain degree. You can see his change.
Yep. You can.
You can. Yeah, I've seen him change over the last couple of years, and I'm listening to him. And I mean, even his position on Trump, I watched it sort of. He could not understand in the beginning how this is possible, and finally towards the end, he's like, hey. So when the people that I do kind of shut the door to are the ones who seem to be so certain. Yeah. They get on and they're so certain, and I go, listen, I appreciate where you're coming from, but I don't. I find it impossible that anybody could be that certain about anything.
Yeah.
And I've walked with you and I've walked with Peterson up until this point where I said, okay, I've accepted that, I'm a Christian, socially, and that has been the foundation that I've grown out of. And I really thought, I was going somewhere with it. But last year my grandmother passed, and I was at the funeral, and it was time to go up and receive the body of Christ, and I couldn't do it. My cousins, I watched them walk up, and I mean, I know these guys haven't been in a church in years, and they're walking up and they're taking it, and I'm going, and I had this moment where I knew that if I did it, it wasn't because I meant it. It was just going through emotion.
Yeah.
So at that moment, it became clear to me that I'm not all the way any which way. I'm still watching. I'm still listening, and that's sort of where I'm at, and I've got to be okay with that. And I'll continue to listen and continue to watch. And maybe I've had some strange things happen to me, and at some point when I gave up control, at some point, not, maybe it was to the universe, maybe it was to God, maybe it was to, but I just knew that I wasn't in control anymore. Like I'm not, you can set the sail, you can, get the mast ready, but the wind's going to blow the direction it goes. And once and for the first couple of years, I raged against it. I mean, I was going to have my will met, and all of a sudden, it just wasn't happening. And then about 2-3 months ago, within a day, everything became clear as to what I'm supposed to be doing. And 4 or 5 things just sort of unfolded in one day. 4 years of waiting for, information and for things to come to, working through these processes. And it all came clear one day. And this is the way you're supposed to go. So COVID has definitely thrown a whack to everybody's lives. And your videos, what I'm getting from them, and the most important thing that I've been taking from them now is, I'm going to be working with people as a therapist. I'm going to be working with people navigating. I mean, not everybody's going to be, but I think more people are than they even have the language to express. And I needed to make sure that, and even now still, I've got about 1.5 years left before I have to start, getting into clinical hours and whatnot. But I want to make sure that I can help people with this thing, and no, I can't give them answers, but I mean, at least if the maps are there for them to say,
Yeah.
and with the internet being such a powerful tool now, and with people, even your the communities that you've created and whatnot, I poked in on them. I looked at them.
They're not
I
for
don't
everyone.
interface.
They're not for everyone.
They're not for everyone, but they just, I said to you before, technically I'm sort of a little bit illiterate, and I go on and just, I don't interface well with the groups. But I mean, this ability to be able to find others who are struggling or who are having, and I'm watching your conversations, and I'm watching you in real time work through with people, about very deep things. And I mean, maybe I'm not learning a how-to manual here, but I'm, if I watch enough and I feel like I'm starting to kind of see that, okay, if you can just be open and non-judgmental, that's the big thing, is to not judge somebody. The moment they start to feel judged, or that, that's the hard thing, is to just go, look at, you're a human being struggling, and, how can I help? And that's, I kind of realized, okay, you've got these skills. You're good at talking with people. You're like good at being with people. I had this guy come in a wheelchair. Yeah, I know. They brought him into jail in a wheelchair. He had tried to commit suicide, and his wife had got involved, and it turned into a hostage situation or whatnot. So this guy came in, and I'd spent about 6 months with him. And he was in chronic pain, but the nurses would say, oh, there's nothing wrong with him, and this and that, So about 2 days before he was getting out, he had an issue with his roommate or whatnot. They had a fight, and I went in and I was talking with him, and he reminded me of my dad a lot. My dad's has a chronic illness, and just for whatever reason, the guy just rubbed me that way.
Yeah.
So I sat down, and he led me to believe that he was going to do it again. He was going to try, like, this is going to be over as soon as I get out. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So we're having a talk, and I said, look, you drugged me into this now, like I'm here, and, and I said, you go through your training and whatnot, and do you have a plan, and what are you going to do, and all this. I threw all that out the window. I just said, look, brother, like, what's your plan? What are you going to do here? And he, I believe he was going to. I really do. And I said, look, what would God think if I didn't intervene? What you want me to just leave? What would? So I sat there and we talked for about an hour. And I don't know why I did it, but I wrote down my phone number and I gave it to him.
Wow.
And I said, if you're going to do it, you call me first. At least give me a chance. Just give me a chance.
Yeah.
I instantly regretted it. Instantly. I thought, do that. Why did you do that? Why would you do so? I mean, God, that's stupid. Why would you do that? So about 3 months go by, and I get a call. It's him. Yeah. I'm all right. I'm okay. things are okay. And he thanked me and he said, I've been in institutions most of my life and
Yeah.
I've never had anybody do that for me.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, this was in and around the time when I could barely bring myself to work. And then I realized, oh, that's it. You can't do this anymore. But you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be working with people, not. And when I say being with them and helping them through, and you're supposed to, this thing that I found myself doing was so against my character, um, but again, it was valuable. I don't want to say the suffering wasn't necessary. I think I had to go through it. I had to go through it. And I decided, and I've had a lot of people kind of support me with the idea of doing therapy and working with people. And I've been really trying to figure out how I want to do that. I mean, I've been through the system myself, and said, this is a lacking thing.
Yeah.
So, I decided that I really, martial arts gave me I started, using the fasting method, started doing the martial arts again, and dropped 60 pounds, got my body back, got the hormones and got the blood sugars and everything in check, got my body back.
Yeah.
I've started to develop this, at least a simple theory of philosophical theory to guide myself, or and it's not a theory so much as it is just a constantly reminding myself to be open to everything and not shut any ideas down, and to be flexible enough. And what's funny is that the more sort of frameworks that you get, you realize it's all connected in so many ways. And I feel like if I'm seeing God anywhere, I'm seeing him through that.
Yeah.
That it's just, no matter how much you try to get away from that conversation, it always boils back down to it. I know that the idea is the meaning. I know you've spoke about the meaning crisis a lot, and others. It's a feel like it's gotten attention. It's starting to grow it, but I mean, what does it mean to try to tackle that problem? I mean, I sit back and I go, what? I don't know if reinventing the wheel is the way to go here. I really don't. I think one man like Jordan Peterson, when you watch the ripples from that particular rock, and you see, and you can almost hear it. You listen to politicians or you listen to other people. Thinkers like him and the Weinsteins and everybody else are getting into people's heads. That those psychotechnologies are spreading around. You can see them. You can see them in people's, and it is working. But I don't know if it's going to work for my 95-year-old grandfather, or that the man with Down syndrome that you spoke about.
Yeah.
I think that we need, I was really interested to read that the majority of the scientists that worked on the Human Genome Project are Christians. That the moment I heard that, I was, wait a second, what?
Yeah.
What am I missing? What am I missing here? I mean, and there's so much that you start to realize. Like, I bowed at the altar of science for a long time, but when you start to play that out and realize how much of that is really unsettled.
Yeah.
That's a very, that was a destabilizing thing on its own too. What do you mean we don't know as much about anything as I thought we did?
Yeah.
Which again, puts you in a precarious situation, because you're going, nothing seems to be what it was, or what I thought it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been a very difficult couple of years, but I say the weight hasn't gotten any lighter, but my legs are getting stronger. And I do want to thank you and all the others for the efforts you're putting forward. I mean, I don't know what I would have done. I really don't. I don't know what I would have done if I would have been sitting here as, alienated from everything and not and being by myself. I mean, that was the first time I had to ever be with myself, and I didn't even like myself. So it was terrible company. It really, really was. So, and I am learning a tremendous amount from watching you navigate, your relationships with the randos and all of that. And it's been very, very good that way. And, you know, all the other things that I've been working on, the stuff I had mentioned to you in the email, that's really just putting my past 10 years to bed. Even the book that I'm writing, I don't care if anybody ever reads it. It's just me trying to close that chapter and trying to say, okay, look, you went through it. What did you experience? What did you learn? Is there anything there for anybody else? You know, and if that's all it is, that's fine. Moving forward, I've been really trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to take my love for martial arts, because it was such an effective tool for dealing with me. How can I take that, and how can I use that as a scaffolding to help guys like myself, or even younger people who are having issues with aggression and whatnot. And that's been a difficult thing. And, you know, like, I always see things through this lens sometimes, but, you know, when UFC was created, the idea that you had all these different disciplines and you created a game set that you can invite them all into, and that somehow this game set is going to validate, you know, whether it's judo or Brazilian jiu-jitsu or karate or kickboxing or whatever. I sort of see all the different disciplines in the academic world that way too, that they're all sort of, you know, they all have, some of them are, you know, have a more broad philosophy, and I kind of break the world up into tools, techniques, and philosophies. You know, is this a tool? Is this a technique? Or is this something bigger? And is it an overarching? Is it a meta philosophy? What is it? And, you know, I go through information that way, and I go, most of what science is offering us is a tool or a technique. That's it. And you know, that's wonderful, but the how is so much more important than the why, right? I mean, or no, sorry, the why is so much important than the how in that sense. It's trying to figure out why to do this. You know, in the interview you were talking about earlier with Michaela and her father, you know, that was a great interview, by the way. It was really
great interview.
It was a great interview, and I enjoyed watching the other lad squirm a little bit there when that was good. But I mean, I've been wondering, like, you know, the intellectual dark web, and you kind of see these individuals, and I don't see the same, what's the word? I mean, you know, like the Weinstein brothers, I enjoy listening to them. I've learned a tremendous amount from them. They're very, very brilliant guys. But they don't seem to be putting themselves out there necessarily as much as some of the others have been, you know. And I kind of go, are these guys really interested in the big picture of because to me, where the rubber meets the road is the point here. This theoretical stuff has to boil down to something that's actually real and that we can move forward with. So much of this stuff is so abstract and so beyond the realm of a regular person that you go, does this, there even a point to this, or is this just, you know, you know, I used to think when the masters used to fly in from Japan, you know, their 6th and 7th and 8th degree black belts, and they're talking about this nuanced stuff that really had no application to the real, you know, real game. And not only that, they didn't even have a responsibility to make it that way. I mean, it's sort of, you know, at what point are you guys just stroking each other's egos and going back and forth? And I hope, but watching them break ground, you realize it's important. It's important. And Rebel Wisdom and the others, one of these, I don't know what you call them, one of these initiatives, I believe, will emerge as the arena for these things to take place. And I think that I had never heard a sophisticated Christian before. I just never had. I being mainly in a Catholic church, and everything was so beyond me, the language and the what would I say, the whole thing was, for me, just seemed so outdated, right? I just didn't have use for it. I had all these wonderful role models in my life, these men who, in my world, I had everything I needed. You know, I really did. I thought I had everything I needed to move forward. And, you know, and it was very effective. I was able to navigate the world and get the trappings of success and all the things that you're supposed to have. Uh, but it didn't, you know, I kind of sold my soul a little bit to do it.
Yeah.
And then you're left with not much guidance. And I mean, I had even gone around to sort of all the men in my family, and like, you know, you're pulling at them for something more deeper,
Yeah.
and they didn't have it to give. They just didn't. It wasn't in them to give. And then you start to think, oh, I'm not going to find these answers everywhere and anywhere. And you know, going online was, you know, once I figured out what YouTube was and figured out, oh, wait a second, okay, you know, this thing, I can use this thing and it's powerful. And I'm still interested to see where it's all going. I mean,
Yeah.
are you going to have 100,000 people
I
10
don't
years
know.
from now?
I hope not.
But I mean, when I look at the scale of things, I go, he's probably going to, right?
Well, but if I do, I probably couldn't have this talk with you today. And
You most certainly.
I, you know, I think part of the reason why things do just sort of float up is because we're not having conversations with people who are prison guards and beat cops and movie projectionists. And you know, I think Joe Rogan has sort of has part of this because he talks to athletes and, you know, MMA fighters. And so there's a reality. I think that's part of, you know, I've never done any martial arts myself, but I would imagine part of the daily contact and the discipline forces people to not let heaven and earth get too far apart from each other. So yeah, but you know, I guess, and this is sort of what being a local church pastor is too. You know, the most of the people in my church don't watch my videos. My mother might watch this video because it's a conversation, and she, you know, with these videos, she has a hope that someone interesting is going to share their story. And it's not going to be a story about, oh, I was down in Hollywood and I rubbed shoulders with these celebrities and yada, yada, yada. It's going to be a story that she can identify with as the vast majority of people who, you know, live life every day, have health concerns, worry about their kids or their grandkids, making ends meet. You know, that's where the battle is joined on heaven and earth, and local church pastors are at that front, as are nurses, as are cops, you know, as our EMT workers. They deal in an area that the idolatrous projected image cannot fully capture, even though it tries,
Mhm.
but certainly in some ways can't understand. And so that to me is where the rubber hits the road, as they say. So
Yeah. I think,
that's why I appreciate your story, and I appreciate your sharing your story and telling your story.
yeah.
We should probably wrap it up, and um I'm going to send this to you, and I'll have you take a look at it before you decide whether or not I should share it, because again, you know, people very good many very wise people will say, well, I want to have a conversation with you, but I don't want to post it. I totally understand that. You know, when I started this, I knew that YouTube, for the amazing tool it is a place for people with not a lot to lose. And when I mean a lot, I mean all of the kinds of things we're talking about, because, you know, your marriage, your children, your job, you know, things that make up the bulk of your life. These are things that have value. And we live in such a screwed up economy that we think all of these things up here have value, things going on in Washington, D.C. or Ottawa or at the universities, and certainly they have value, but the sheer immensity of the value in people's personal lives, that's the value. Because as you see with the places that you've been, people who, where when that goes awry, and it goes awry all the time, when that goes awry, it's they have nothing, they no one, again, just, this homeless guy this morning, he wasn't hatched, you know there was a man and a woman that contributed genetic material to his conception and eventual birth, and he probably went to school someplace and had friends in school, and quite likelihood somewhere in his late teens, early 20s, schizophrenia grabbed him, or maybe he did drugs, or who knows what. But you know this is he has lost touch, and at some point, because as a society we don't just shoot these people or put them to death, we say, well, we want to help them. Okay, now we're trying to do something really hard. We can put a man on the moon, but this dude we have no answer for. And that is a reality that escapes common. I think it is actually willfully suppressed by society, because we all understand to one degree or another, we are just a hair's breadth away from being that person, that our sanity can go, our health can go. We are on the precipice of that. And because we see people drop off that edge all the time into the chaos and then land in a jail or a hospital, and eventually 100% of us, a cemetery. So no,
But I'd
this
love to ask you
is,
one more. Could I
yeah,
ask
go
you
ahead.
one more quick thing?
Sure.
When we talk about Peterson's, main claim to fame is the meaning, and how you create that meaning through responsibility and this
Yep.
and that. I can't help but thinking that it can't exist without the social component, though, right? Like
Right.
this idea that because if you're, and I've observed this from watching men alone in a box, you don't have a whole lot of context when you're in a box by yourself.
Right.
And the idea that it is meaning to each other, isn't it? It's meaning, and that meaning
Yes.
is established based on the group.
Yep.
It can't, you can't be meaningful by yourself.
Right.
So I tend to wonder, is it as neatly separated out as meaning at an individual level, when it really is ultimately folded into a social level, or at least contextualized
Yes.
that way. Anyway, that was just a thought that I had about it. Like it's and I've enjoyed your videos, and keep it up. I'm really you, and I've got you and Vervaeke and Pajot as my three wise men at the moment. So I've been you guys are the rabbit holes I'm going to be in for the next year or so.
Well, good.
And
You honor
appreciate
me with
everything
that.
you're doing.
Well, thank you,
So,
Corey. I'm so
very
glad
nice.
I'm so glad you contacted me, and I'm so glad we had a talk. And I do pray that that your studies are fruitful, and that if in fact you do go into clinical work, or become a therapist, I hope that it becomes a deeply meaningful path for you. I actually have, I might send you, I have another Canadian therapist that I actually speak with regularly.
Oh, okay.
We don't post. I should get him online, because he works actually with a lot of Indigenous communities that are very remote. And I'm sure in your line of work, you see plenty of people who come from those communities as well, because in some ways the story of, the long story of those communities is also a deep meaning crisis, where, we, Christians might feel like modernity sort of started kicking the stilts out from under their, axiomatic structures. Well, the Europeans on the shore of the New World, and everything that they brought, whether they were, bringing it for good or for ill, seriously undermined the entire world of the fragments of this population that survived the germs.
Mhm.
And it's yeah, I should really have him on the channel to talk more about that, because he, when I listen to you, well, you're both Canadian, but when I listen to him, I see many of the same. We think we are so smart because we can make these amazing little internet devices in our pockets that can do incredible things, but we can't deal with the basics for how many people, and then we put them all in these boxes because we don't know what to do with them, and then we sort of tell lies about, oh well, you're exactly what. you know really,
Yeah.
anybody who has any personal experience with this stuff at all knows, okay, you go to that shrink, you get on the pill parade. It's trial and error, baby. I've seen it all the time. And
Yeah.
you can talk a big game about what you know, but show me the omelet, show me the results. I
Yeah.
gotta see it. So
And
yeah,
and that's just it, brother. Thank you so much, and I hope maybe in the future we'll have a chat again.
sounds good.
Um, if you're ever in Atlanta, Canada, you let me know. I'll show you the sites. I do live in the lobster capital, which is important, right?
I love lobster. I love
Well,
lobster.
we have the lobster festival every year, so you let me know, and I'll make sure you're in.
That sounds great. Thank
All
you,
right, brother.
Corey.
Take care.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye
Bye.
bye.